Many of your fans, which are quite numerous, talk about you as being a consummate sales and marketing guru, whether it be
Hardly.
in the private sector or indeed in the sporting world. And I'm just wondering, in terms of developing your pitch, your approach, whether it be negotiating a sponsorship arrangement with a network or with a corporation, what was your view as it relates to concessions? Because obviously you would want to go in at a certain level, but what would happen in terms of if you had to make concessions? Did you have a concession strategy? Did you think about concessions? Was there another plan? Was there a backup plan? How would you approach those kinds of aspects of your business career?
Well, I think we go back to one of your earlier questions. You have to go into that kind of a sales exchange and negotiation saying, what do I want to get out of this? I'm representing a group, an organization, myself, or whatever. What do I need to get out of this? And what am I prepared to live with? If you can't get everything you want, what compromises are you prepared to make? If you're going in saying, well, I need to know just what my maximum position is, because sometimes when you're selling a concept, an idea, a product, etc., you might want to do a few test sales first, just to test the waters. And what I say to people is, you'll never know how good you can be or how much you can maximize your opportunity until you're prepared to live with the consequences of failure. And learning to live with failure is hugely important in terms of personal growth in business or anything else you do in life, because you don't know how far you can go until you've experienced that failure and you've tested yourself. When you do go through that, you learn from it, then you pick yourself up. Well, you see it in sport all the time. The whole concept of building muscle, building oxygen uptake, and that sort of thing is built on the principles of progressive overload. You push the body as far as it can go, you let it rest, and then you take it and push it a little bit further the next day. You can do the same thing in your business negotiations, etc. And sometimes you'll lose a deal as a result, but losing that deal will let you know then how to position yourself for the next one. So I think that in going into any kind of a sales exchange, you want to know what you want to get out of it, and then you have to understand what are all the elements of it. What does the other party need? What are the features of it? If you understand the other person's business, do your features really translate into a benefit? You can't just sell because I think it's good for me. And I go back to the relationships with government. You were in government for many years. And when I first got into the Olympic world, I'd not spent a lot of time with government when I was running Quebecor because they didn't have a lot to offer us. But I knew that they were the consummate partner that we had. So I learned what made members of parliament, the bureaucracy, etc., tick. And I went from being a cynic to a tremendous supporter of people that lead this country, and appreciate the kinds of efforts that they put in. So in doing that, you have to understand, well, somebody's been elected. They don't go up there because the perks and everything else. Most of the people that are up there in government really are smart people who work very hard and really care about the country. What kind of a win can we give them? And if I'm going to ask them for money and get into a negotiation and sell what I'm trying to do, you've got to be well prepared and understand what's in it for them and what gets them excited about the sales process. Same thing in business sales. You have to understand why you. What is your unique proposition? What distinguishes you from the pack? And I learned that, for some reason I learned it very early in my sales career. When I started at the Financial Post newspaper, there was a flower shop at the top of my street, and I had them make me a boutonniere every day, a rose boutonniere. And I wore a rose boutonniere every day to work, and all the old sales pros there thought I was a bit of a young goof, And I was 30 at the time, but and I went because I said, well, these people that I go and call on, whether it be media buyers or advertising managers, etc., they're seeing 10 or 15 or 20 people a day. So why would they remember me? So I call back and say, oh yeah, you're the guy with the flower. So I think creating those kinds of points of distinction.
Unique selling proposition, eh?
Yeah, in addition to your product, they are exceedingly important.
Tell us about your experiences in terms of trying to deal with difficult people,
Well,
whether on your staff
Sure.
or across the table?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes on the staff, if they're not that crucial, you can exercise executive fiat, and those people unfortunately leave. But there can be very, very difficult people that you work with that are colleagues who are very important to your success. In the sales world, some of your best salesmen can be very aberrant personalities, and everybody knows they're really good. So it's a case of learning how to deal with them and being able to sit down behind closed doors and say, listen, we understand that for you to be successful, you've got to let you spread your wings and you've got to be who you are. But there are certain lines that you can't cross. You know, you can't embarrass the company. You can't, if you've got differences with me, we'll take them behind closed doors, et cetera. So I think you've got to deal with those difficult people in a way that gives them the freedom they need to be successful if they're crucial to the organization. But at the same time, they know that there are certain lines that can't be crossed. And I think, by and large, that's always worked for me. Difficult people in other situations where you don't have control over them, that's another matter. And it's not unlike the question you had earlier about people with big egos, et cetera. They need a little bit of stroking. If the difficult people are there and you have to deal with them, well, then you've got to make the concessions or compromises or be conciliatory where necessary to get done what you have to do. But I think the crucial thing there is understanding, well, why are they difficult? What are the trigger points? Avoid those. Don't get into a conflict of egos, and don't get into a discussion or a negotiation with that individual at a point where the circumstances are going to create a volatile kind of discussion rather than one that is leading towards a resolution.
In dealing with difficult people, is persistence an aspect that you would run with? I mean, there are people that are across the table that I mean, you just have to be persistent with. If not, there will not be success. Is that an aspect of the negotiating process?
Persistence to agree, but you have to know when to stop. You know, if sometimes you can cross the line and that's it, and you shut down the doors to communication. And so I think persistence doesn't mean just hammering away on the same point. If you're getting nowhere on a certain point or with a certain tactic, you have to say, okay, well, let's get creative here and let's change the tactic. Maybe we're going about it the wrong way. You know, persistence is exceedingly important in sales. And I'll just give you a little aside story. I can remember in 1994, I built a factory in India, and I used to print all the phone books in India in a little town called Gurgaon, just outside of New Delhi. And on one trip over, I went down to Jaipur. I had a bit of time off, and I wanted to explore Jaipur a little bit. And I was going up to see the Amber Palace at the top of a small mountain outside of Jaipur. And I hired a driver to take me down there. It was about 15 miles outside the city. And you can get to the top of this little hill either by jeep or walk, or you can ride an elephant. And I wanted to ride an elephant, so I hired what they call a mahout, who's the guy that is an elephant driver. And there's a wall that goes beside this road up to the top, and I got on my elephant, and I had a camera, and I had my mahout take a picture of me on riding the elephant, etc. But they had these, this was the era when digital photography was just coming in, and they had these people would take your picture and then try and sell you the picture. They're selling you everything in India all the time. So going up the hill, we just started up, and there's this wall, and suddenly there's this salesman with my picture trying to sell it to me for about 50 rupees. The salesman's an 8-year-old kid, you know, and he follows me all the way up to the top of the hill, you know. And we started at 50 rupees, and by the time I got up to the top of the Amber Palace, and it's about 2 kilometers up, we're down to about 25 rupees, which is probably a couple of bucks. But I had my picture, and I didn't need it. So I went in, toured the Amber Palace, came back out. The salesman's still there, but now he's got the sales manager, who's his 12-year-old brother. They follow me all the way back down again. By the time we get down, we're to about 20 rupees. I still haven't bought it. So I get in my car, and I have the driver take me back into Jaipur, and I go and visit the City Hall Museum. And I come out of the City Hall Museum, and here's the sales manager and the salesman again. Now what they've obviously done, they've gone and given the driver a rupee and said, tell me where you're taking this guy. They either hitchhiked or whatever, they got there. Now we're down to 10 rupees, and we're in the middle of Jaipur. So I finally bought the picture for 10 rupees, which is less than $1, because I figure if I don't, they're going to show up at dinner at my hotel that night. So I use that when I talk to young salespeople about how important persistence is, because you know, you can't give up, and that's a universal sales rule in your negotiations, etc. I guess these kids, they were persistent to the point where they found my breaking point, yet they never got to the point where they really irritated me and I was, you know, going to dismiss them out of hand.
The reason why I asked that, if we were just watching the recent NHL and NHLPA collective agreement, and we heard Don Fuhrer repeatedly say on national television, well, you know, we just have to stick at it, stick at it, stick at it, stick at it until we get some sort of an arrangement which works for both. So I would think persistence is an important aspect.
Well, I think if you're going to be persistent in the context that you just applied, you have to understand where that persistence takes you at the end of the day, and as the ultimate resolution, because of your persistence, going to lead you to a worse deal than the better deal you might have had you compromised early on. Obviously, I wasn't inside that negotiation. I watched it with interest, having been in the sports world, being in the sports world now. I think that was a negotiation that got extended more because of the personalities involved and the issues involved. I think had the personalities been more compromising, less out in the public, more capable of closing the door and saying, what do you need out of this? This is what I need. How can we get a win? They'd have come to a resolution much earlier on. The net loss, I think, was to the players in that, and they'll never recover the money that's lost, and some of them will never recover their jobs. So yes, persistence was there. Yes, at the end of the day, the persistence probably led to, with all the external pressure around the league and in the general public and amongst the fans saying, we better get this thing done. But I think maybe less persistence and more quiet
compromise.
Negotiation and compromise might have got it done in a better way. So,
over your many different experiences, what are some of the big deal killers that you've come across or seen or witnessed? Ego kill deals?
Ego, certainly. I think not understanding what the other party needs to get out of a deal is pretty key, and having unrealistic expectations yourself, it can be a real deal killer. You know, you've got to understand if you're trying to cut a deal, what is it realistic to try and get, and what is not realistic. Now, if it's a case of doing deals to buy companies, etc. I mean, when I was with Quebecor, we might look at 20 companies to buy one, and then you can push and etc. But you got to make sure it's a fit, and you've got to make sure it's that the deal's a fit for the other party. But I think on the one hand, having unrealistic expectations is a real deal killer, and the other is not understanding what the other party needs to get out of it.
Communications. What's your best form to communicate to another side, whether it be a sponsor that you're trying to get? Is it the one-on-one meeting? Is it the text message? Is it, how best do you communicate, and what would you recommend in terms of communicating with another side?
Well, I don't know if I'm old-fashioned, but I still like a one-to-one discussion. And if it's something that's really important to me and somebody says, well, listen, why don't we, I'll call you tomorrow morning at 10 and we'll talk about it. I'd say, well, where's your office? I'll come over and see you. I'd rather sit one-to-one any day, because so much is communicated in body language and making eye contact when you're listening to the other person to demonstrate that you care, that you really are listening. So I would always opt for a face-to-face meeting when I could. Barring that, certainly a telephone conversation. I use email and text, but I tend to use it in the context of conveying information, you know, the perfunctory type stuff, not the kinds of things that are required in fine-tuning and closing a deal or getting over significant hurdles. I think they need that personal touch. And even to the extent that if I really, in that written world, if I want to convey a message and have the other person pay attention, I still will write a personal letter. Because there's nothing like getting a handwritten letter, because you know that the other party
Is
sat
it
down.
old-fashioned, though?
Well, it may. I think that it's old-fashioned from a technological perspective. People don't do it anymore. That's old-fashioned, but I don't think the idea of demonstrating to the other party that you care enough to have taken the time and invested your time in them, I don't think that concept will ever be old-fashioned. And it takes time to write a letter, you know. It doesn't take, you know, it would take me to write and send and post and, you know, put the stamp on everything. A letter probably take me 30 minutes, and something that I could do with a text in 30 seconds. But it's much, much more impactful.
What would you say to young people who are continuously using the internet, whether it be email or text, various forms of new technology, in terms of communicating with others, particularly if they're attempting to get a job, if they're trying to negotiate something to their advantage? What would you share with them in terms of how best to communicate?
Make sure you expand your communication skill set, that you use all the tools. Communication tools aren't a succession of we're going from this to this to this. It's an expanded skill set, so you've got more tools, more weapons in your repertoire, so to speak. You know, that's because we've got rockets, you don't get rid of guns in war. You know, I mean, maybe that's a bad analogy, etc. But you know, speaking, talking one-to-one, then suddenly comes along the telephone. Then we got faxes, and then we get email, and then we get text, and all of these things are important, etc. But they all have a role in the communications process. Use the one that's most appropriate for what you're trying to communicate at any given time. But it's not a case of, I now have this, therefore I don't need that. And I think that the world that is plugged so much into the new communications technologies should take a bit of time to learn how to sit and talk and listen and express ideas, and you know, read a lot more in terms of books, that sort of thing.
In your experience, who are some of the best negotiators that you've seen or you've witnessed over the years?
Well, certainly came across a lot in my business world. Watch people in the political world, like, you know, and you and I were talking earlier, someone like a David Peterson who listens so well, and people that make the other party feel important, feel that they're part of the process. Ones that are well prepared going into a deal, that know where the deal is to be made, what the other partner wants out of it. You know, the Pierre Pelletot, who started the Quebecor organization, was a very effective negotiator because a lot of people call him a bottom feeder. He knew what value was. He knew what he could get out of a deal, but he listened to other people well too. He understood people well. So I think those people that listen well, that are well prepared, and that care about the other person, that care about the other party, and make the other party feel that they're a good part of the process.
Even if they're a difficult person?
Even if they're difficult, for sure. That's you know, the deal's got to come first. It's not about me winning and you losing. It's about us getting something out of this that is good for the stakeholders that we're working with.
Well, Mr. Rudge, I want to express our appreciation to you today on behalf of the Ryerson Negotiation Project for joining us and sharing with us your views on negotiations, as well as your many, many successful past experiences. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity in the not too distant future to rekindle this engagement as we embark upon future programs on the Ryerson Negotiation Project. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, and to all the students out there, good luck. You're living in a world that's just full of opportunity, both in terms of the size and scope of the universe that's available to you now. If I was 25 again, I'd be in China in a second. You know, I love it there. It's the Wild West of business, you know, so there's nothing but opportunity out there right now.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.